U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has wrapped up her multi-day visit to China. She traveled to various parts of the country, speaking with business leaders and Chinese officials on the importance of economic ties between the two nations. Dong Shua has more from Beijing.
Well, as U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrapped up her second trip to China, at a press briefing held in Beijing on Monday, she reaffirmed that the United States is not seeking to decouple from China. She emphasized that the two economies are deeply integrated and a full-scale separation would be disastrous for both economies. And over the course of 5 days, Yellen had wide-ranging meetings with the Chinese leaders, local officials, academics, students, and American executives, both in the southern metropolis of Guangzhou and the national capital, Beijing. And at the press briefing in Beijing just before her departure after the 5-day visit, Yellen outlined 3 areas in which both sides made significant progress during her visit. First, starting intensive exchanges on balanced growth in the domestic and global economies. And second, expanding cooperation in anti-money laundering. And third, resolving to continue financial technical exchanges. Yellen also raised the concerns about what she described as overcapacity in industries like EV, solar panels, and lithium batteries. And experts told me that by taking up Chinese overcapacity in the clean energy sector, the U.S. is trying to create a pretext for protectionist policies to shield American companies. And we also heard from the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, who said that from a global perspective, quality production capacity is not excess, but actually faces a serious shortage, especially for developing countries, which can be benefit from an increase in quality production. And Yellen's trip is part of efforts by Washington to maintain open lines of communication with Beijing to manage competition as well as to prevent unintended conflict after the bilateral relations plunged into a new low early last year. And her visit came days after President Xi Jinping and President Biden spoke on the phone last week, the first conversation between the two leaders since their face-to-face summit in San Francisco last November. And attempting to continue dialogue, Yellen said that just as military leaders need a hotline during the crisis, American and Chinese financial regulators must also be able to communicate with each other to prevent financial stresses from turning into serious problems, having tremendous ramifications for citizens as well as for the international community.
So Dong Shua there in Beijing. Okay, now let's get more on the significance of Yellen's trip to China. And for that, Andy Mok joins us via Skype. He is a senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Andy, always a pleasure to see you, my friend. I want to start by taking your take, as it would be, on Yellen's 6-day visit to China. What really struck you? What are you taking away from all of this?
Well, thanks for having me on, Sean. I think that this visit is, in and of itself, very positive for its length, for the breadth of her interactions with a wide range of stakeholders invested in the China-U.S. relationship. So I think that's very, very positive. I think she's in a very awkward position, though. Secretary Yellen is one of the most accomplished economists in the United States, and yet she has been tasked with delivering a message that I think for most economists doesn't make a lot of sense. This talk of overcapacity, first of all, I think economists recognize that equilibrium is always dynamic, so markets always adjust. There's periods of oversupply and undersupply. So even on as basic a principle of that, I think this must put her in a difficult position having to make this argument. I think the second part of this, too, is just on the facts, has been well covered, I think, in different media outlets and by different observers, is that there may not actually even be overcapacity in these new energy fields. These are capital-intensive businesses. There are long lead times. You can't just turn out electric vehicles overnight. And China's preparing for an enormous surge in global demand. So I think that's the second area where this economic argument falls down. And then finally, even for American self-interest, it's also well known that these kinds of punitive measures don't work and, in fact, ultimately backfire. And I think, again, the meeting is positive. I think the tempo is positive. There's going to be follow-up meetings in Washington, D.C. next week. So I think the fact that there's more meetings, there's greater engagement is very positive.
Okay.
I think that the arguments might not be as effective, though.
I want to get into the argument about unfair trade practices in just a moment, but let's also examine the timing of her visit there. It was only about, 3 weeks after the end of 2 sessions where the government came out and said, we're going to have high quality, high production. That's the way we're going to be moving forward. Do you think that played into this at all, if you consider China's dominance in solar panels and its expanding EV business, considering right now they're in Europe trying to push those vehicles there as well?
I think it certainly has played a part, Sean, just for the fact that the 2 sessions, of course, are a very important political event in China. And what happens in China, of course, is having increasing global impact. So it's not just in Washington, D.C., but I think all around the world. There is much greater interest in the policy decisions that China makes and that are announced at the 2 sessions. That being said, these developments in new energy, this transition to new energy, new productive forces, et cetera, is not something that is brand new. I think, this has been on the horizon. People that follow China know that this is an important development. So I would say yes and no, Sean, that, that the 2 sessions perhaps is a factor, but that this is also a clear long-term strategic direction that China is taking.
Okay, let's talk about some of the issues that Yellen did raise. Unfair trade practices and Chinese subsidies on green technologies. There's no question that China's government works very closely with a lot of its private sector.
Well, I think here, I think we can, reasonable people can disagree on what is the appropriate level of government involvement. But if we were to say that any kind of government support for industry is not appropriate, I mean, that would be ridiculous on the face of it. I mean, where would you draw the line? So government support for education, for higher level tertiary education. The U.S., of course, invests a lot through the Department of Education. It has its own organizations for supporting research and development, the military being a very big one. So, where do you draw the line? So I think that reasonable people can disagree on what is fair, and I think that's very natural. But I think these sweeping categorizations, again, really lack any foundation in economic theory and even practice, I would say.
Quickly, Andy, we're kind of tight on time. I want you to talk about the fact that the China Central Bank, as well as the United States, are agreeing to work together to stop money laundering. That's something certainly positive. How's this going to work? And again, we're kind of tight on time.
Sure, I think we have to see, and again, I think the parallel made between military to military communications makes a lot of sense. I mean, financial crises can also erupt, cause tremendous global damage, and I think the fact that there's a recognition and a desire to work together is certainly a positive.